Borders have been the heart of several conflicts in West Asia, but this one is the star. Hello and welcome to a new episode of the West Asia Post with me, Ghadi Francis, our weekly show where we bring you to the heart of the most turbulent region in the world. We are currently standing in the town of An-Naqoura in southern Lebanon. Days from now, historic Lebanese-Israeli maritime talks are tipped to begin in this very town. But interestingly, these talks come even as the two remain at a formal state of war with each other. Israel and Lebanon will begin historic talks to resolve a long-running maritime dispute, one that could have tremendous political consequences in the entire region. The Speaker of the Lebanese Parliament said that a framework had been agreed for the negotiations.
This is a framework agreement that paves the road for the Lebanese negotiator, which will be handled by the Lebanese army with its competent leadership and specialized officers.
Leading the Israeli delegation will be the Energy Minister Yuval Steinitz, who said that the talks will begin after mid-October, brokered by the United States. The talks will be held in the southern Lebanese town of Naqoura and will be overseen by the United Nations.
The United States was asked from both sides, Israel and Lebanon, to act as mediator to demarcate the borders, and they are ready to do so.
This was a special token of affection given by myself and the First Lady to...
United States hailed what it said was a historic agreement between the two. The United Nations peacekeeping force patrolling the shared border has also welcomed the news. While Lebanon and Israel have had contested borders over the years, the issue of maritime border is particularly sensitive, especially due to the possible presence of hydrocarbons in the Mediterranean. In 2018, Lebanon signed its first contract for offshore drilling in 2 blocks in the Mediterranean for oil and gas with a consortium comprising energy giants. While the initial drilling in Block 4 had shown traces of gas but no commercially viable reserves, exploration of Block 9 has not started and is far more controversial because of disputed ownership. Resolving this dispute would be a significant political achievement, one that could mitigate risk for energy companies looking to drill in the volatile region. A historically disputed border and 2 West Asian parties that haven't seen eye to eye in years. But how does the situation look on ground? We bring you to an exclusive ground report from the borderline. Let's see. This is southern Lebanon. The deeper we move towards the borders, the higher the danger and the harder it becomes to use cameras. This is an army area, but WION team already got all the needed permits and chaperone. UNIFIL, Lebanese army, Hezbollah, and on the other side, Israeli army. What we're listening to now is a drill. It's not the real war, but anything here is always possible. This is not a normal borderline. It is a history of wars, invasions, resistance, martyrs, soldiers, prisons, bombs, mines. It is a line drawn with blood and tears over the years. The dispute never ended. It only changed forms. Israel used to occupy this land we are now in, these villages. All these lands were taken back year 2000. The Blue Line is a border demarcation published by the United Nations 20 years ago for the purposes of determining whether Israel had fully withdrawn from Lebanon. It is 120 kilometers. But it's not war nor peace here. It's a typical volatile volcano. Year 2006, Hezbollah army leader Imad Mughniye executed Al-Wa'd al-Sadiq operation. Hezbollah initiated diversionary rocket attacks on Israeli military positions near the coast and near a border village, while another group crossed from Lebanon into the Israeli points, ambushed 2 Israeli army vehicles, killing 3 soldiers and seizing 2. Hezbollah promptly demanded the release of Lebanese prisoners held by Israel, including Samir Kuntar, in exchange for the release of the captured soldiers. A 33-day war resulted in great loss, but Israel couldn't achieve an invasion and had to later use German mediation and execute a historic prisoner swap. For the past 14 years, no war has happened here, but there are almost daily violations of the ceasefire. Israeli planes above and Hezbollah militants on the ground. But Hezbollah is not here by accident or force. It is how most of the Lebanese people who live here want and vote and support. You can see the cutouts and the posters of the Iranian Supreme Leader, of the Hezbollah leaders around me and everywhere in this region, which is a story by itself about the influence, the ideology and the support in this area. Needless to say, it is a key determiner in the geopolitics and the diplomacy practiced in and by the region.
Israel is my enemy and I will fight like my daddy.
I am proud of my father. I am proud that he died fighting for our land and our cause and our dignity.
By September 2018, Israel completed 11 kilometers of a concrete barrier along the border with Lebanon designed to protect Israeli communities from Hezbollah. But that didn't really change anything. This here is a town called Udaisi. It's one of many towns in Lebanon that are really on the same line with the Israeli forces. Here it's very close. You can actually see it's around 25 meters. This is the place where Israeli soldiers walk every day, all day. It's that close, and it's even closer elsewhere. This is a very strategic point for the whole of West Asia. Right here you can see this mountain is called Jabal al-Sheikh or Mount Hermon. This mountain has Syrian troops, Israeli troops, Lebanese troops, and also UNIFIL. It's that sensitive here. Today, on a borderline that was never resolved, starting from the Mount Hermon between Syria, Palestine, and Lebanon southeast to reach the water southwest. They would sit down for talks concerning the maritime borders on a disputable border. Would they rise above it? Would they forget it? Can money from oil and gas make 80 years of dispute vanish? The Lebanon-Israeli talks could shape a different future for West Asia, and we will continue to bring you exclusive stories from this area. But before we tell you more, we have a lot of stories lined up for you on today's edition of the West Asia Post. Let's take a look at the headlines.
Former Prime Minister Saad al-Hariri calls for the restoration of the French plan in Lebanon. Hariri says he will only return as Prime Minister if there was agreement by Lebanon's fractious parties on securing an IMF deal. Jordan entered a nationwide 48-hour lockdown for the first time in months, as COVID-19 cases in the country witness an exponential surge. In a bid to ramp up pressure on Tehran weeks ahead of the US elections, the United States is set to impose fresh sanctions on Iran's financial industry. The move will effectively shut Iran out of the global financial sector. Syrian Kurdish women express opposition to Turkey and its local allies in the northern Kurdish majority city of Qamishli, rejecting of their one-year-old control over the Syrian areas. Longtime chief Palestinian negotiator Saeb Erekat tests positive for coronavirus. The senior PLO leader has been a key figure in Palestinian politics for decades and is currently isolating in his West Bank home.
Syrian President Bashar al-Assad recently said that the Russian bases help keep the balance of power in the war-torn country. In September 2015, Russia formally entered the Syrian civil war, with Assad's rule increasingly under threat. 5 years since then, Moscow has managed to save the Syrian regime. But at what cost? Our next report tells you more.
September 30th, 2015. That was the day when Russia formally entered the Syrian civil war. It was a time when President Bashar al-Assad was in deep trouble. Losing Idlib delivered a massive blow to the Syrian president. But Moscow jumped to the rescue of its ally in Syria. The fall of Assad would have threatened Moscow's interests. And Kremlin did not need any more convincing. Moscow soon began military operations against opposition territories at the request of Damascus. The country began cementing its permanent military presence in 2017, following a deal with the Syrian government. Russia's military power meant that the dynamics on the ground shifted soon. In just 5 years, Russia has not only managed to save Assad's regime, but also cemented its hold in West Asia. Kremlin's message was loud and clear. It was here to stay. In a recent interview, Assad mentioned that Russian bases in the country help maintain the balance of power. While Putin's helping hand tipped the conflict in Assad's favor, what did Moscow gain out of it? Kremlin dubbed the intervention in Syria as part of its anti-terror rhetoric. But the reality was far different. United States' reluctance to interfere in Syria left Moscow a vacuum it could now use to consolidate power. Russia's role as an ally also gave it leverage with other West Asian countries. Several countries re-engaged with Moscow over the years, including Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Israel. In terms of economy, Russia has not gained much economically from its direct intervention in the region. But growing political leverage meant it could now strike a deal with the Gulf countries. Over the years, there have been reports of hospitals being targeted by Russian Air Force and the rising death toll among civilians. None of it has, however, threatened Putin's stronghold. Moscow has even announced the withdrawal of Russian troops twice in 2016 and 2017. But soldiers continue to be deployed on the ground. With the growing economic crisis in Russia due to the pandemic and a political conflict in neighboring Belarus, many believe that Syria is no longer Putin's concern. But for now, it looks like Russia looks forward to maintaining its status quo in the never-ending conflict. West Asia Bureau, WION. World is One.
Turkey and Saudi Arabia are in the middle of a bitter diplomatic battle. Both of them are fighting to be called the leader of the Islamic world. But now political tensions between the two countries are spilling over into trade. Business leaders in Saudi Arabia are calling for a boycott of Turkish goods, a boycott that could really mean trouble for President Recep Tayyip Erdogan.
The battle for supremacy in the Islamic world now has a new battleground: trade and commerce. Saudi business leaders are asking citizens to boycott Turkish goods.
To address international trade disruptions and
the call comes from Ajlan Al-Ajlan, the chairman of the Saudi Chamber of Commerce. Ajlan has been urging citizens to boycott everything Turkish, from imports to investment and tourism. The reason, according to him, is the continued hostility of the Turkish government against Saudi Arabia's leadership. While Saudi Arabia is yet to confirm reports of an informal boycott, the story on either side is very different. Many Saudi importers say that their Turkish containers are often held up at the port for months on end. Some say customs officials ask them to not import directly from Turkey. In Ankara, a Turkish lawmaker claims that exports from his country are being held at the Saudi border for longer than necessary. While tensions between the two countries is not new, the murder of Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi in Turkey could have been the last straw. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan believes that the hit was ordered by the Saudi royal family. He, however, has never named the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman explicitly. Earlier this week, Turkey charged 6 Saudi nationals for Khashoggi's murder. But that's not all. The growing Cold War between the two countries means trouble for the entire region, and reconciliation looks increasingly unlikely. On Thursday, Erdogan accused Gulf countries of targeting Turkey. This is what he had to say, and I quote, "It should not be forgotten that the countries in question did not exist yesterday and probably will not exist tomorrow. However, we will continue to keep our flag flying in this region forever, with the permission of Allah," unquote. Earlier this year, Saudi Arabia had blocked several Turkish state media websites. In response to that, Turkey blocked Saudi news websites in the country. This time, with Saudi Arabia possibly imposing an informal embargo, the impact of this blockade could be damaging, especially for President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Saudi Arabia is Turkey's 15th biggest export market. In the current financial year, Turkey has sold goods worth $1.91 billion to Saudi Arabia. Compared to the previous year, that's a drop of almost 17%. Some of it can be attributed to the COVID-19 pandemic, but data reveals this is a long-term trend. Over the last 5 years, Turkish imports have fallen gradually in response to rising political tensions. It's probably the result of an informal boycott that has been in place for much longer than noted. West Asia Bureau, WION World is One.
West Asia is known to be the birthplace of several religions. 2 of the largest religions in the world, Islam and Christianity, emerged from this region. In our next report, we take a look at how people in various places of West Asia have turned to faith even during the pandemic.
For months, mosques worldwide took a series of measures to curb the spread of coronavirus. Many closed their doors completely, and others banned congregations and used their speakers to remind people to stay at home. For centuries, the Umrah, the Islamic pilgrimage to Mecca, the holiest city for Muslims, has been a changeless feature of life in the Arab world. In war or peace, prosperity or famine, for millions of people, the same rhythmic chant echoes across cities and towns 5 times each day. But worshippers were not allowed to enter Makkah's grand mosques since the Saudi authorities suspended prayers on March 19 in an effort to combat the spread of the virus. Younger Saudis cannot recall ever seeing it so empty. Older ones draw a parallel with 1979 when the mosque was seized by extremists and besieged for 2 weeks. Now Makkah has slowly stirred from the 7-month hibernation as pilgrims trickle in after Saudi authorities partially lifted a coronavirus ban on performing Umrah. Thousands of worshippers entered the Grand Mosque in the holy city of Makkah in batches to perform the ritual of circling the sacred Kaaba, a cubic structure towards which Muslims around the world pray. Worshippers are no longer allowed to touch the Kaaba, but some enjoyed a respite from the usual crowding.
This is an indescribable feeling. This is a gift from God, and thanks to His will, we have made it to the Umrah.
And it seems like the other countries of West Asia are following suit. Thousands of Shiite pilgrims thronged the streets of Karbala and filled the shrine of Imam Hussein as the Arba'in pilgrimage reached its final day. Arba'in marks the end of the 40-day mourning period for the 7th century killing of Imam Hussein, Prophet Muhammad's grandson. It is one of the biggest religious gatherings in the world. In 2019, an estimated 14 million Shiite pilgrims flooded Iraq to attend Arba'in, including about 2 million from neighboring Iran. This year, however, only 1,500 pilgrims per country are being allowed to fly into Iraq, while Iran has been authorized to send an additional 2,500 overland. Volunteers have erected food stands to provide millions of pilgrims with free food and drinks all day long during the Arba'in festival.
We are currently serving 3 meals, breakfast, lunch and dinner to the pilgrims of the Arba'in of Imam Hussein, peace be upon him. We are committed to all the health rules.
Some volunteers provided free masks, but few pilgrims wear them despite constant appeals made by the authorities for wearing masks and social distancing, which has been widely ignored during the festival. The scenes are a little different down south in Israel. The priestly blessing prayers at the Western Wall in Jerusalem during the Sukkot holiday look different this year due to a nationwide lockdown. Jewish worshippers prayed in fenced-off enclosures to limit contact, and only those living within 1,000 meters of the holy site were allowed to attend. The traditional blessing is usually attended by tens of thousands of worshippers, but Israel is grappling with one of the worst outbreaks in the world on a per capita basis. One might wonder why, despite rising cases of COVID-19, these West Asian countries have reopened for the pilgrimage. For countries like Saudi Arabia, the pilgrimage is the backbone for expanding tourism. These countries have been trying to diversify the economy from being simply top oil exporters to also a tourist attraction which requires them to boost the number of visitors. But these plans have certainly been disrupted by the coronavirus. West Asia Bureau Report, WION World is One.
That's all we have for you on this episode of the West Asia Post. I will see you next week with a brand new lineup, bringing you more stories from the world's most volatile region. Until then, stay home and stay safe. This is Ghadi Francis, and you are watching WION. World is One.